Hey guys, today I interview Samong Yang. He's got a really cool YouTube channel where you can follow along him doing hunts that are super accessible. Most of them are in the Pacific Northwest, but overall, what Samong is doing is really cool because he's showing you hunts that you can do, right? A lot of these are over the counter tags, easy to draw tags for bears, mule deer, blacktail, Roosevelts. We talk about all those hunts. We get into tactics, but I actually think the most interesting part of this interview is talking to Samong about his culture as a Hmong hunter, how he grew up hunting, and how it is a big part of their culture as Hmongs to be a hunter, to be a forager. So I thought that was pretty cool. We dive into some specific tactics that he uses on blacktail, mule deer, Roosevelts in thicker country that I freaking love. In particular, we have a discussion of close range glassing in a long range way, right? I think if you just listen to that single part of this conversation, you're going to be able to kill more animals, really, regardless of the species you're hunting. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Guys, Tong, okay? I have been obsessed with this stuff for 3 or 4 years. Ever since I got on a keto, carnivore, paleo-esque type of diet, I've had a hard time finding healthy snacks. Tong is a great option, particularly the slabs that have this fat on the side. That's where your energy is if you're a fat burner like me. Super simple ingredients in this, guys. Literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Compare that to your gas station jerky. A great snack in the backcountry or just day to day. Biltong Depot is a huge supporter of my content. Go to their website, biltongdepot.com. Use my discount code CLIFFG, CLIFFG for 15% off at checkout and to support this content. Thanks, guys. Samong, awesome to have you, man. I get a lot of requests to get people on here, but dude, I'll be honest with you, I hadn't watched your stuff before I started to get this trickle of prompts and comments from my viewership and people in my membership group. They're like, "Hey, you should interview Samong," and I'm pronouncing that right? Samong.
You're nailing
All
it.
right, cool. Anyways, I then I went and I checked your YouTube channel out, and what's crazy, dude, because I've gone through like the same
Mhm.
deal, like acquiring a subscriber base. I think when I first looked, man, you were at like 50 or 55,000 subscribers, and I
Mhm.
just opened up today, dude, and you're at 90. So you've been freaking on a roll.
It really has to do with just the past 2 years. I feel like YouTube is one of those things where, like, it's really hard to get started, but once you
Yeah,
get that ball rolling, it's kind of just like a snowball, it's exponential. From my experience, I mean, I'm not speaking for anybody else's, but from me, the first couple years that I started, man, it was an absolute grind, just even gaining 100 subscribers, you know? But
oh yeah.
as your content, as your videos are just uploading, they're just kinda soaking on YouTube, I guess it's naturally, you have more sources that people are gonna come through to your channel, and so it's just kinda snowballed in the past, like, 2, 3 years, which is I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. Well, good on you for like toughing it out, man. Because I feel the same way. I don't think people who don't do. I mean, we'll just stick to hunting YouTube related stuff. They don't realize like 1,000 subscribers is hard to get. You know what I mean? I mean,
Mhm.
it's hard to get that many people's attention. I think looking at your videos, man. I'm going to summarize what I see from your channel, and then I want to kind of hear like what your goals are with it. To me, you're doing you're filming hunts, editing hunts, and people are able to follow along, kind of join in on the hunt with you, right? But one
Mhm.
thing cool about your hunts, man, and one reason I think that you're probably become crazy successful is a lot of your hunts are accessible, right?
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
people can do like these exact hunts, or they can do like very similar hunts wherever they're at. You know what I mean? And that's huge, dude. There's a giant market for that. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, the thing about why I feel like I have gained such a loyal fan base, viewership, is exactly what you said. It's a lot of my content is very relatable. I'm
Right.
not this guy that hunts places where people can't hunt. I have nothing against that, but like the truth is the vast majority of the market, if you will, are these just everyday weekend warriors for the most part. And I'm part of that crowd. Like that's when I
Sure.
started my YouTube channel. I was in college, or heck, I was actually in high school when I started. And so like the only time I actually got to go out was on weekends, and I don't come from a wealthy family. I come from actually a very poor family, and so like even with what we could afford, like we still had to do some of the very like the cheaper end type of hunts, if you will. And so a lot of it is just over the counter hunts, general season tags. Had no extra money to put into special permit tags and whatnot. And so at the time, I didn't really think much of it. It was really just this is what I do. I'm just going to film it because my goal when I started it was I really didn't have a goal. I didn't
Sure.
start YouTube to be like, oh, I want to be this big YouTube guy. No, like I really started it because I just enjoyed filming.
Yeah, having
And
fun.
so naturally, just having videos soak on YouTube, people start watching and people just start liking it and they start following along, and then over time that pattern continues. And then obviously like what I do now versus like what I started 8-10 years ago, it's the biggest thing that has changed is just the quality of the video and the quality of the cameras that I've used. But at the root of what I have here, it's yeah, I'm just an everyday guy. I don't see myself as this celebrity or anything. I'm just a normal guy. I pick up the tags that anybody else can pick up, and I go hunt public land where everybody else can go hunt. Obviously, it'd be really nice in the future to go and do like an Alaska doll sheep hunt where it's very niche. But for the vast majority of what I do, and it's something I consciously tell myself today, I want to always remember my roots, and I don't ever want to let that go because I feel like most people are following me because of that reason right there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure, dude. It's a cool topic in itself, Samong, and I always talk to people about this because I think you nailed it, man. I uh, I personally have battled with this a lot, man. Like more on the guiding side, not necessarily my content. As I've guided for now, like a little bit in and out of it, but like 20 years of guiding elk hunters, I have gone from guiding some hunts that were like the majority of my guiding has been like the grind, dude. Like
Mhm.
wilderness stuff. Hey, I hope in the next 6 days we get one shot opportunity. I hope we call it like if we get into bugling elk twice or three times during this backpack hunt, it's going to be an awesome hunt. Stuff that's hard. And then over the years, I've migrated where had these opportunities thrown at me to guide on places that are the same places that Cameron Haynes shoots bulls on or Rogan shoots bulls on. Like I've been able to hunt those, and it's awesome. You know what I mean? But dude, it's totally different worlds. And
Yes.
and what you nailed is that there's this weird exposure. The type of hunts that very few people can do, they get a massive amount of exposure. The type of hunts that everybody can do actually don't get near as much exposure. And I think what happens, man, and what's happened a little more lately is a lot of people who, particularly if they're just getting into hunting, they do it for 6 months, a year, they do a couple hunts, and they're like, oh, like Samong's stuff, like, maybe he doesn't have a 360-inch bull on every thumbnail, but that's actually the shit that I have to do. So
Yes.
I'm gonna start watching his stuff, you
Yeah.
know? I think there's a lot of that, man.
Guys, no excuses. All the stuff that I talk about on the podcast, all the stuff I talk about on YouTube, you can do it and you can do it with me. There's a bunch of hunting, fishing, spearfishing experiences on my website. Go to pursuitwithcliff.com. Right on the top on the menu, click experiences. It'll walk you through all the different options. These are trips oriented around making you better. It's about the skill set and it's about improving as an outdoorsman. So if that's you, that's what you want, go check them out and join me on the next one.
No, and like I said, I'm not here to trash on people who get to hunt ranches. That's a dream for
Yeah, yeah, of course,
almost
like,
anybody.
everybody's gonna do
You
it.
know?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
that I'm not that guy. I don't have that privilege. Maybe in the future I will
Yeah,
get
yeah, sure.
that sort of opportunity, but no, it's really back to the core because like you said, there's a market for essentially every aspect of hunting you look at. There's the
Right.
reason why those big hunts get so much exposure is because everybody just
Yeah,
lives
yeah.
vicariously through
Yeah,
whoever's filming it, whoever's producing it.
sure, and they're awesome.
But
Like, I
yeah,
mean,
and
like
they're awesome,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
all for it. But
Yeah,
there's also a market where I feel like people can watch that, and then, for the vast majority of hunters, they're gonna be like, "All right, now I gotta sink back into reality. Now, where can I go watch videos where I can
sure.
relate to who are out here struggling to find a 3-point mule deer on public land?" You know,
Yeah,
and so it's just kind of like for example, like this year, this past 2024 season, like for the first time in my life, I actually was able to go on a quality elk hunt, which in Washington State, like that's essentially the most coveted elk tags that you can draw in the state. I didn't draw the tag; my uncle drew the tag, but it's like that's for the first time in my life I've actually been able to film a hunt because he drew the tag, and so
Sure.
like over time, again, back to what I was saying earlier, I hope that it becomes more of a norm in the future. But like, even if that stuff happens, it's like I don't ever want to divert from the roots of where I come
Yeah,
from,
yeah.
which is a lot of times just over the counter hunting.
Yeah, and you'll keep doing
Yeah,
that type of hunting. I mean, even if you migrate a little bit, man, you get pulled back into it. I
absolutely.
so it's well, and there's like there's other aspects of the hunts, right? Like it's weird because it's kinda for me personally, Samong, a lot of the at least in col and I wanna dive, like, deep into the Pacific Northwest, man, because honestly, I'm pretty naive
Hmm.
to a lot of the a lot of the hunting that goes on there. I've hunted a fair amount and guided some in Oregon, but you have a lot deeper knowledge base on a lot of the hunting there. But in Colorado and Wyoming, Idaho, where I've spent a lot of my time, guiding, the thing that's crazy is the harder hunts, they tend to correlate with more intense, more beautiful landscapes. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And so, and I that's there's probably a bunch of factors why that is. Just in these wilderness areas, they manage elk a certain way, whatever. But it's kind of cool because if you embrace both types, you get that too, right?
Hmm.
You get exposure to a bunch of new places also. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it on that because the one thing I've learned, especially in the past few years that I've finally started venturing out to other states, is every place is so unique. That's why when people like to dog on a certain thing, oh, like killing elk in this place is easy and over here is hard. I'm like, dude, every single hunt, oh, they have their own set of challenges that you have to
Sure.
overcome. Some hunts might have this one aspect where it's easier, but it's harder in a different aspect, right? So a lot of people will say that Rocky Mountain elk are easier to kill than Roosevelt elk because they don't bugle
Right.
as much as the other one, at least. But from my experience, it's like, okay, even if that was true, which I have not found that to be true at all. It's like the terrain that Roosevelt elk live in compared to like where some Rocky Mountain elk live in, it's so different. So it's like
Sure.
Roosevelt elk, even if they don't bugle as much, some of them are just living in clear cuts, and you can just walk roads all day. Versus elk, they might bugle a lot, but like for example, where my uncle drew the quality elk tag this year down in the Blue Mountains, Southeast Washington, they might bugle a lot, but to simply get from the bottom to the top, that's a
Yeah,
in of itself,
yeah, it's
It's
crazy,
like
sure.
you can nitpick what's hard and what's easy, but at the end of it, it's like the one thing I've come to learn is like every hunt has its own set of challenges, and you just have to learn to embrace it and like commit yourself to it. You
Yeah,
know,
sure.
I feel like a lot of it's just an ego thing. Like I want to feel like I do a bet harder hunt than the other guy, so I'm gonna trash on the his style of hunting or whatever he's
Oh,
hunting.
yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I try to
No,
just walk
that's
a
totally
fine line.
that's totally what it is, so I actually yesterday, I was talking to a guy, and we got into a similar conversation because guys do the same thing on weapons,
Yes.
you know,
Oh yeah. Yep.
bows and muzzle loaders and crossbows and then guns and then long range guns. It's like in the end, like who cares? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But there's for sure that we try
Mhm.
like I think that hunters tend to suck in or the hunting world tends to have a certain personality type. And then demographically, we're mostly men, so we're like always trying to create like this pecking order,
Yes.
even in a hobby that is like it's something for us to enjoy. It's still
Yeah.
like a natural tendency for us to do that. But
Yeah.
uh but man, I want to just so far I have like 1,000 different questions to go. But I had a question about this, and it's actually one of my big questions too, Samung. You're the first Asian hunter I've ever interviewed. And
Mhm.
so one of my natural questions related to that, if you don't mind diving into it, is like, was your family were they big hunters? How did you get into hunting? Like, what's your background, and how did you end up, becoming like a big passion for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I feel like that's something that I didn't really think about. I just kind of figured that was kind of a norm, but like the more I've been exposed to people or hunters of all different backgrounds, I've come to realize that I have a pretty unique background. But no, so I'm Mong, so our
Okay.
our hunting roots come back from just our people. way back in Laos. So Hmong people, we don't actually have a country, but if you had to say where would you say the most Hmong people came from, it would be the country of Laos.
Yeah,
And so Laos is a third world country and it's a very poor country. And so naturally, when you're in these third world countries, uh, in order to survive, you're either farming or you're a hunter, a gatherer, or some type of fisherman, or a combination of all of that. And so, uh, just to long story short, that's kind of how we've always survived. We've always been hunters, we've been gatherers, we've been farmers, you name it. That's what we've been. And so back in like the 70s and early 80s, this is called the Secret War, where Vietnam invaded Laos. And because Laos was a third world country, we didn't have a military. So when you're getting raided by another country's military, the only thing you do is you flee. If you don't flee, you're going to get killed.
sure,
And so my family, like everybody else, tried to just scatter to the any nearby country that would provide refuge. And for the vast majority of Hmong people, we crossed over to Thailand. And what Thailand saw was they saw this massive flood of just refugees. And obviously, Thailand wasn't going to be able to essentially host an entire country's population. So from there, it started to be this idea of, okay, where can we start sending these people? Because Thailand's not going to be able to host all these people that are just flooding in.
sure,
And so while that secret war was happening, obviously it's this worldwide news going on, and the US actually came to the aid of the Hmong people. So I forgot who was the president at that time, but the US sent some military and forces to kind of combat the Vietnamese during the secret war. And particularly with my family, we obviously uh, fled or became refugees here in the US, because I think one of the qualifications in order to send you to another country was you had to have family or some type of relative that met certain qualifications for you to be able to be sent there. And so I don't know how my one of my grandpas was already in Spokane, but because we had one of my grandpas here, like essentially my dad, my uncles, my aunts,
okay,
that generation, they came because one of my grandpas was already here in Spokane. And so
yeah,
that's where I came in, right? So like I was born in 97, my dad and them, I think they arrived in Spokane in around like 85, 1985 or something like that. And so 12 years later or so, that's when I was born. So 12 years in a new country, you've already somewhat established your daily life. And so when I was born, my dad was already foot in the ground and he's already like figured out work and housing and obviously hunting here in the US, because the
sure,
thing about hunting is it's so deeply rooted in a person, especially coming from a background where you literally had to hunt to survive. Even though you flee to another country, it doesn't just leave you. Like
right,
you're a hunter at heart. And
sure,
so my dad just said, like I want to go hunting, and
right,
so he slowly started picking up what the U.S. had to offer. Obviously, deer, elk, you name it. And so when I was born right into that. So I think the earliest I went hunting was I was like 4 or 3 years
yeah,
old, and that's life as far as I can remember it. And so ever since that young age, it's kind of just been my life, and then it's kind of trickled over to what it is now. And so
right.
that's really the background of where I come from as a hunter.
Yeah, dude, it's super interesting, man. Because I had assumed that, or I would have made a guess that you were Hmong. When I was a
Hmm.
kid, I mean, I grew up in super rural areas, but there
Hmm.
was a pocket of, Hmong kids that I went to high school with, and they
Hmm.
were all, and I'm sure it was through the same for the same reason. They
Yep.
came there as refugees, or their family did or whatever, and they were all outdoorsy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also, like, I would say, not just hunting, very well, like, for instance, and I mean this in a very positive way, Samong, like, the
Hmm.
minute that irrigation water was, like, taken out, they would be out getting the crawdads, like, before we did,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like it was, like, very foraging oriented,
Hmm.
which is cool, man, and I didn't know that I just assumed it was that group, but it sounds like that's pretty common amongst
Yeah,
that
I think
culture.
if you just took the demographic of Asians in general, I think Hmong people are definitely one of the most outdoorsy group, at least in modern society, that we're still connected to the roots. Because I get a lot of comments from Koreans and Vietnamese and Japanese and Chinese people, and they're like, "Dude, we have never hunted in our life." Granted, on the fishing world, it's completely different because
For
like
sure.
almost every Vietnamese person I meet, they're a huge fisherman, right? But
Right.
I don't meet a lot of hunters in the Asian demographic outside of Hmong people at all.
Right.
And so yeah, as far as that goes, it's like it was baffling to me when I started getting exposure to all these
Yeah.
sorts of
You're
different
like, whoa.
backgrounds because I'm
Sure.
like, really, you've never met an Asian that's hunted before?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's all I know, you know? And so yeah, no, it was, I guess you could say it's almost like a culture shock where you're like,
Sure.
oh, like these people don't hunt. Like, am I weird or what's going
Yeah.
on here?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so
Dude, Samang, this is anecdotal, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. So I used to, it's been a long time, it's like pre-COVID. I used to do a bunch of hunting in British Columbia and a lot of it in the South, like in the coastal mountains, maybe 3 hours north of Vancouver. And in some areas, we're not that remote. We did a lot of spring bear hunting. I don't know, at some point, I was probably taking like 40 or 50 bear hunters in BC, like scattered about throughout the area. But in that area there to the south, kind of just north of Whistler there's a couple main highways that come out of Vancouver and huge Asian population in
mhm,
Vancouver. And one thing that is very interesting that I found is a lot of times because we would glass off of a main highway sometimes, particularly when the snow we had us limited where we could find bears like early spring, we would glass off that highway. And a lot of times, people would be pulled off in the same, it wasn't like a real high traffic highway, but the same pullouts people would be pulled out, and a lot of them would be Asian folks. And anytime you're hunting for bears and you run into anybody who's not a hunter, it's always like one of those species where you don't know. You don't know. You don't
yes,
know if you don't know if people are going to be like disgusted by it, curious, whatever. Right? It's
mhm,
just it's one that touches buttons for some reason, and like I said, could just be anecdotal, but every Asian person that I interacted with, none of them were negative about it. Very curious about it is how I would describe it. And I don't know if it just would happen to be the case, but I've always found that very interesting. I've never, and honestly, man, like even in the comments that I get on my YouTube channel, to my email from other podcasts I've done or whatever, I've never had an Asian tell me I'm a piece of shit. I've had every other race tell me I'm a horrible human for hunting. So, I mean, do you have any
mhm.
thoughts on that or
Yeah, I feel like that just comes from a cultural background thing because again, if you just look at the U.S. culture and if you just look at the overall Asian culture, it's animals are I feel like very central to the Asian culture, right? Like they're like talking to a U.S. market here, it might be somewhat I don't know, somewhat touchy, but like bears killing bears in Asia is not some type of polarizing thing. It's almost like a norm. Butchering animals and whatnot, it's a norm. Because I mean,
right,
if you just look at the Asian markets, like there's literally you could just walk downtown and there's literally live animals that you can go and have them butchered right there on the spot. And so I
right,
feel like this idea that where the culture is so in tune with slaughtering animals to eat, when they see you on the side of the highway saying that you're going to kill a bear, it doesn't come off as a shock because it's kind of
it's not that
they're
weird,
in
yeah.
tune with that, right? It's just like, oh, this
Yeah,
guy's killing a bear versus okay, well, we killed chickens and whatever animals back home anyway. Whereas
sure.
here in the U.S., I feel like with the way the meat industry is, killing an animal is so secluded.
Yeah,
Most people don't see that stuff, and they get disconnected to where meat comes from. And so when you start bringing up these subjects of, oh yeah, I'm out here trying to kill whatever it is, it's like really like people still kill animals. Little do they know it's happening every day in like these
yeah, yeah,
factories, you know?
yeah,
And so
yeah.
I feel like this it's just a disconnect of the culture of where those people are and how closely they can see to where their meat comes from.
Yeah, yeah. Dude, I think you probably nailed it, Samong, because and I have to admit, like, your explanation, it would have seemed a little bit counterintuitive to me at first because when I think of, Asia, I actually think of like highly urbanized populations,
Hmm.
but the cultural difference you're talking about is stark, man. Like you're right. Like,
Hmm.
a chicken getting its head cut off or whatever is pretty normal. And for
Hmm.
some reason here, everything we do has been geared towards trying to put as many layers between that and the consumer as possible. It's really kind of wild.
Yeah, I mean, even today, if you just walk into like maybe like a Chinatown, right?
Mhm.
Like if you go to a Walmart, when you look at your meat aisle, it's nicely packaged. You don't see an animal, you see a chunk of meat. If you go to like
Right.
a Asian market, sometimes there will be like literal ducks
Yeah,
hanging,
sure. Yeah,
literal
yeah.
pigs hanging, right? And so it's like even just that alone, I feel like these are just kind of the building blocks as to why we've become so disconnected here in the US. It's like every single layer, like as you explained, that you put between a consumer and the meat that they're consuming, they just become that much more ignorant to it. And so when they find out about it, they're going through all these layers, and it's essentially just a giant shock to be like, oh, the animals are actually dying. Whereas
Yeah.
if you're close to where, oh yeah, I know animals die already, it doesn't come off as much as a shock, you know? And so I
Yeah.
feel like that's kind of the main cultural difference between the US and like other Asian countries.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm sure you're right, dude. And it's weird because it's not like a real there's no rationality to it because even if you don't see it, you kinda should
Mhm.
know it's happening, but it makes a difference for sure. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, how we interact or, and how we perceive things, it does make a big difference. Makes a lot of sense, man. Dude, I love it. That's really I appreciate you being willing to, like, go down that path, man, and discuss that because that's an
No,
interesting
I feel like
topic.
part of the reason why we're in the holes that we are in today is because we've done our best to censor all this stuff, and we want to avoid the conversations when I feel like that's something that should be had. And I'm always been a firm believer in transparency and honesty, and that often has its own things that come at you, especially from somebody like my platform. Like for example, kind of off topic, but like if I upload a video where I make a bad shot on an animal, I
Mhm.
find it within myself to uphold my integrity to still show that stuff because that's I want to keep my stuff real. And the reason why I want to bring this example up is because a lot of times from what I've realized reading comments regarding those videos where I wound an animal or I make a bad shot or I miss is like people who are honest and transparent about things get the short end of the stick, right?
Yeah,
Whereas people who
sure.
put on this fake persona, just pretending to be this perfect person, they're getting praised, they're getting support, and I get it because I'm not gonna sit here and sugarcoat it. It's like, yeah, if I make a bad shot, there's a certain type of scrutiny that I deserve. But at the
Sure.
end of it, to me, it's like it's not really about making the bad shot. It's about being honest about it. And I feel like if you're just constantly sugarcoating yourself and just saying, "Oh, every time we go out hunting, it's always pretty," people become out of tune, kind of like our culture that we've been talking about. And so that anytime you make a bad shot, it's a culture shock to them now, and they're like,
Yeah.
"This shouldn't be happening." And it's like, no, it does happen, but it's just that we've done so much to censor ourselves now because anybody who tries to be honest and authentic about it, they're just getting beat to the ground. And then you start having these people who don't want that criticism just start shelling out, and then
Right.
all the next thing you know, we're even more distant from reality at this point.
Right. Yeah, man, it's an interesting topic, and your an example is a very good one, man, because it does expose and it exposes you to it exposes you to a lot of criticism, not necessarily from outside the hunting world. Most of it's
Yes,
probably from hunters. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
A lot of them, a lot of guys will attack other people for that. And there's always this argument, right, that you'll hear, and I'll be honest, I don't know exactly where I'm at on it. I have a couple different thoughts, but the big argument you hear against it is like, "Hey, we need to put hunting in a very positive light for like the non-hunting community." And I'll let you comment on that, but I want to kind of give you my other thought on this, Simon. I I think particularly if you're somewhat in the business of bringing people into the fold, which I think you are. Like that may not we'll get into like what the goal is with your YouTube channel, but I think regardless if it's a goal or not, there's probably people who watch your videos who have never hunted and then
Hmm.
they become a hunter. I'm guessing that you've probably get emails from people like
Yes.
this and pretty cool part of doing what you're doing. The thing is, man, if you're not authentic about, like, let's just stick to the example you talked about, you're doing those people an injustice, right? Because
Mhm.
they get so frustrated when they do something that's an honest mistake, or maybe it's a little bit of a lack of a skill set, or maybe it's just shitty luck. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, this is not a controlled environment, and they get exposed to that, and then they think that what's going on for them doesn't occur to anybody else, and they're dwelling on it, or they quit hunting because of it. Like, dude, I get at least a dozen, maybe several dozen emails during archery where guys are like devastated that they wounded a bull elk with their bow. And I'm like, brother, it ain't gonna be the last one. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so, like, you know, this is how you can make it a constructive thing, right? Figure out why it happened. Think
Yeah.
about the anatomy shot. Well, all the shit. But it matters because if you just avoid the subject, there's all these people who are freaking like walking around lost in this
Yeah.
like this part of the deal. So, do you have any thoughts on either one of those,
Yeah,
man?
no, I think that's just the difference between I think there's a fine line of what we should show to the non-hunting world and what we should show, right? I think that's the ultimate question here is like, okay, you're trying to portray hunting in a good light. Where is that fine line of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? And to me, I mean, I think this is something where everybody has their own personal opinion on it. I'm just going to speak for myself. I've always
Sure.
believed that it doesn't matter what it is. If you make a mistake, that's something that is worthy of sharing because I think there's a lot of benefit to that. Because as someone in my position where I have thousands of people watching me, when you make a mistake, it's something where not only can I learn from it, but I can also teach literally thousands of people that one mistake I went. And that in turn, I feel like it benefits the community as a whole because that could have saved thousands of people from making that same little silly mistake that costed me an animal or whatever the situation may be. I think there's a lot of merit on that. Obviously, the downside to that is, as people might quote, that's fuel for the non-hunters or anti-hunters to use to convey whatever the conversation or topic they're trying to push. But the reason why I'm going to leave it like that is because I don't believe that uh, it's hunting first at that point. It's who you are as a person, right? It's is your integrity better than just being a perfect hunter, or is being a perfect hunter mean more than your integrity, even if that means you're faking a lot of stuff, right?
Sure.
And so like today, it's like, man, there's so much garbage going on in our hunting space. It's pathetic. You have people who go out and they shoot deer with a rifle and then they go out and pose the deer with the bow, post it on Instagram claiming that they shot the deer with a bow. Like there's so much fake things going on in the industry right
Oh
now that
yeah,
a lot
sure.
of people don't realize, you know? And so it's like to me it's like I don't care what other people are doing. Like I care obviously depending on what it is. Like you have to care
Yeah,
somewhat, but
sure.
to me it's
Yeah.
like I'm going to worry about myself first. And to me I've always just come to the conclusion of like I'm going to do what I can to be as transparent as possible, even if that comes at the cost of criticism or even losing viewership. I feel like I've that's just not who I am. Like I want to be honest, and I feel like in turn, with what that has done, is I have a very very solid foundation of viewership because a lot of people, if you watch my videos where I don't make a perfect shot or something, yeah, you get like the 1 or 2% of people just dare to dog on you. But if
Yeah.
you look at the vast majority of comments, it's just like people who just relate to it. It's like, man, I made a bad shot on this animal and I felt so bad about it. I can relate to you, you know?
Yeah,
And again, I'm not here to say that make a bad shot on the animal. That's not the point here. The point is
yeah,
like we're
sure.
all trying to be ethical, but things happen, mistakes happen, and you got to own up to it.
Yeah, sure, and that's the best way to really improve too, you know what I mean? So,
Yep.
like, it's pretty amazing, man. Years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I did a video on, like, common game violations that, like, honest guys make,
Hmm.
and one of them in the rifle elk world is accidentally shooting 2 elk, super, super common, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And, it's funny because, like, the comments on it, you can kinda tell who is a fairly new elk hunter, because a lot of the fairly new elk hunting comments would be like, "How could anybody do that? How does it happen?" And then, like, after that, there's like 900 comments of everybody's story about how they did it when they were 12. They did it when they were
Yeah.
16. Like, this is how it occurred. Like, and my hope is with those things, and I don't even want to call it a hope because I think it's a reality. Like, enough people see those who are going to in the future experience that, and they're gonna just think for a second.
Yep.
Like, before they shoot, that they like, "Oh, I think that's the same bull I shot at." Before they do that, hopefully someone will be like, "Oh, I remember like all those comments," and then they'll
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it just goes to the point where like whatever topic is at hand, it's a personal decision of does the good that come out of this outweigh the bad, right? And so like
Sure.
I've always learned the I've always leaned on the side where like if I make a bad shot at an animal, I think the lessons that I teach those who are willing to learn, it outweighs the good or the bad that fuels the non-hunters or in
Yeah.
a lot of cases just the hurt feelings of other hunters.
Sure.
And so that's just something that everybody decides on their own. That's just kind of the ways I've always leaned.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, for sure, man. So what I'm gonna do, Samong, is I'm gonna give you one more difficult question because
Okay.
you seem like a pretty damn smart guy. And then we're gonna go straight positive, fun hunting stuff, gear
Okay.
stuff, all of that. So this was actually from my membership group from Jeremy. And he
Okay.
starts out highly controversial topic, and I'm assuming you're going to be familiar with this
Okay.
one. What is your take on the demand for Western hunting over the course of the last 4 or 5 years? And he's referring to, are you familiar with like Matt Ranella, the
Yep.
hunt quietly stuff?
Absolutely.
So that's what he's referring to. Um, and then he says, "This is something that I'm personally conflicted on. So I just want to hear someone else's perspective on it. I'm sure between Steve and Matt, Christmas at the Ranellas must be really interesting." Anyway, so he's just making a joke there. But someone, what are your thoughts on that? And I guess, so just in case the viewers don't know what we're talking about, there's a little bit of, and Matt Ranella, a real smart guy, has some logical arguments, has put out some content. He hasn't been real active lately, but maybe it was a year ago, 18 months ago. He's pretty negative on guys like you, guys like
Mhm.
me, that one of the symptoms of the content we put out is that more hunters are doing the hunts that we all like, and that could have some negative consequences for historical hunters. And but that's basically the framework. What are your thoughts on it, Simone?
Yeah, that's definitely a big question.
And you can
And
be
and
as
it,
brief or as deep as possible,
no,
man.
I'm
It's no
willing to
big
go as
deal.
deep as possible because I think these are whether you hate or love it. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had because it's a realistic conversation.
Sure.
I think first and foremost, I think there's a line that needs to be drawn because what's the term? The term is influencers nowadays. Like I
Yeah.
guess we're just getting drug into this term that I don't know where it came from, but that's the term, right? So in this case, we're all influencers. I don't
Yeah.
know what that means, but I just learned that I've been part of that group now, whenever it started.
Sure.
But I think there's a fine line because I think, as you mentioned, Matt Ranilla, he has some very solid logical arguments that I'd agreed with. On the other
Mhm.
side, there's a lot of points I also agree with coming from Steve. I guess if you want to split it between the middle, it's Matt versus Steve. It's
Sure.
hunt quietly versus no promoting hunting is good. There's a fine line between. I guess you can break it as good and bad influencers. You can define it, but in this case, I'm just using those terms to have a better
Mhm.
example, have a more straightforward conversation. There are certainly some people in this space where they exploit hunting and they use that as an advantage on social media for personal gain. And I guess you can, again, I'm trying to be as black and white here because you can use all the talking points I'm saying right now on either side of the
Sure.
system here. But just to be black and white, that's an example. There are certainly some people who use hunting as an exploit for their own good. But there are also some people on the other side where they genuinely hunt because they love to hunt and they want to promote hunting in a good light. And I think there's needs to be a fine line that is drawn between those two types of people. And I don't think anybody who is actually serious in this space, it takes much effort to see the difference between those two types of people. there are some people who ride that line very close where you just kind of like, I don't really know what this person's about. But for me personally, I guess I can speak on this is because when I started, there was no such thing as monetization on YouTube. There was no
Right.
such thing as I didn't even know there was such thing as paid products. The only time you heard of a paid product was a television show, not on social media,
Sure.
right? And so it's like now that I've kind of just naturally gone through my paces and now I have these business partnerships and whatnot. It's like some people see that as like, oh, this person's just doing it for money. I get comments about that all the time, but it's like, yeah, but it's like when I started, that wasn't even on the
Right.
table. So it's like, how can you say I started for money when it was literally never on this conversation? It wasn't even possible when I started to even call YouTube a job. There was no such thing as a YouTuber or an influencer, right? That doesn't mean that everybody starting now is just doing for the money. Granted, I think that is a giant reason why there's a lot of people doing it. The point I'm trying to make is the intentions of every single person, whether they're whichever side they're on, you kind of have to go and dissect it on your own individually and not just like say, oh, all of these people are bad and all of these
Right.
people are good. Because I feel like that's the most ignorant thing you can do is just clump everybody into one group because not everybody's bad, not everybody's good. You might not agree on all the topics on the same thing, but back to the point of Matt and Steve here, it's like I think there is a certain line there is to be drawn. There are certainly some people who just hunt and they exploit the number of tags in the Western states. You whatever wherever it is, you name it, they exploit that for their personal gain. Whereas there are some people like me where I don't want to toot my own horn here, but it's like I just hunt because I want to go hunt. When
Sure.
I plan my season, I plan these hunts where like I genuinely go hunt. I don't hunt because I feel like I have to go hunt because I need content or I need to do certain things for a contract, right? I do it because I want to do it. And I feel like
Right.
that's just a distinction that we need to draw here. It's like, okay, if you're going to support somebody or if you're following somebody, really observe that person and make your own, you can make your own judgment on it and you can decide for yourself is the influencer, is social media bad for hunting? I feel like that's something that everybody needs to come to their own conclusion on. Again, I've always just kind of leaned towards the middle almost on every single subject that you can talk about. Yes, there's good and there's bad on both sides. It depends on whatever take you want. But I think that there's merit on both sides, and it's not good to just say that one side is completely all good and one side's completely all bad.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you make some good points, Samong. I think one thing that I'll say, and I don't mind like making this, I guess, part of my argument in the subject matter is anybody. I think there are people that probably try to do what you're doing. Um, my structure is a little bit different than yours, but they try to do what I'm doing or whatever, and they're thinking about it as a career slash way to make money. That, in a sense, is hilarious to me because
Uh,
you would make 5 times as much money doing something else. I would make 5 times as much money doing something else. Absolute fact. Like when you just calculate in everything that goes on. So that part of it, I just like it's hard for me to even like get into that conversation that there's like this massive economic incentive for individuals to,
yeah,
like at the individual level. Now, I always debate because one of the challenges with the hunting industry that has migrated a lot for me personally just in my life is the gear and the dollar amount of money that is spent on gear now has drastically changed in my life, man. How old are you, Song?
I'm 27.
Yeah, so I got 15 years on you, and like, man, when I was, like that, like when I was 15, the gear market, I don't care what anybody says, was like the dollar volume, even if you inflation adjust it or whatever, like take your average take your average elk hunter, what the average elk hunter, Western elk hunter is spending on gear now, inflation adjusted to 1990, it's not even close, dude.
Hmm.
And so I think there's like this macro thing that is occurring that for sure a symptom of that is that people, I'm actually gonna say may, there are more hunts going on that are part of that. I would give Matt that, I would give that, and I don't it's hard for me to say, like, well, is that a horrible thing? I don't I don't know, man. Like in the end, the elk populations, the blacktail populations, everything else where you hunt, the bear populations, they're managed by the fishing game.
Mhm.
And I honestly, Samong, if you get 15 tags a year and they're all legal, I just don't see how it's my place to tell you that you should only get 7 or
Yeah.
or your take. So for me, it's really hard, even if there is this kind of bastardization that's gone through the commercial aspect of it that I do personally find a little bit distasteful but I can't like pinpoint it. I still don't know that that correlates to me saying like, "Hey, we should really, people should only be able to hunt. People are hunting way too much, or it's pushing people to have too many tags." I just don't see where it's like my place to say that.
Yeah, I think the argument that a lot of people make from that is the meat aspect. For example, somebody with 4 elk tags, right, in a year, then the argument that I most commonly hear is who eats 4 elk in a year, right?
Right.
And so the tags is one thing, but the meat's the other, right? And again, I'm kind of like you, where like if whatever you're doing is legal, like I'm not gonna
Yeah.
waste my time telling you what to do and what not to do, right? I don't think any hunter in their right mind today, if I went up to a random person, whichever spectrum, wherever he lays on the spectrum, and I said, hey, this year I'm gonna pay for 4 elk tags for you to just go hunt. I'm willing to bet that person is not turning that down. He's
Right.
gonna be like, yeah, I'll take those 4 elk tags. I'm gonna go hunt. And so I think part of it, I feel like it comes out of envy, jealousy that they just can't do it. I think that's one reason. Another reason is a legitimate argument, like who really needs to eat 4 elk in a year? That's a fair argument too. Now, depending on how much a person eats, I mean, I know there are some people who they'll eat 2 elk in 8 months. It doesn't even
Sure.
last them, right? It's like you don't. It's like how do you know how much meat somebody's eating or how much somebody is donating, right? Because the thing
Yeah.
with me is like if somebody just goes and looks at my YouTube videos, like this year alone, like I filmed like over a dozen hunts where like we killed something, right? And so if they looked at that, they said that's a lot of animals that died. But the thing is like every not every single animal I took home and not every single animal I took whole. Because how my family has always done it is how we've always structured it is whoever you're hunting with, you're dividing that animal evenly between that many parties. This year I took 4 deer and my freezer looks as empty as it did at the beginning of the season, right? Because a
Yeah.
deer's not that big. You're splitting a deer between 8 people, everybody's getting like one steak a night for like a week, right? And so it's like to come into this idea of saying how much meat you need to eat. It's kind of like a to me, it's a pretty weak argument. I understand where it
Sure.
comes from. That's why I'm bringing the conversation up. But I feel like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
pretty weak
sure.
argument. And so again, these are definitely touchy subjects, which is why we're having this
No,
conversation
yeah.
here. But
Yeah.
again, I understand and I hear both sides of the argument. And I feel like that's at the core of it. I feel like every single person, I don't care if you're against it or you're for it, the single most thing that we can all do at the core is listen to both sides
Yeah,
objectively.
sure.
Don't
Sure.
be biased to one side. You can have your opinions afterward, but at the core of it, listen to both sides. And at the end of it, like you're gonna have to make your own judgment, right? And so like Jeremy, who brought this question, who's feeling conflicted, like I'm not gonna sit here and tell him to support it or go against this. Like look at it from an objective standpoint and make your own judgment on it.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's the right approach, man. It's and the other thing is like regardless of how one feels about it or regardless of, how much the western hunting numbers grow or shrink or whatever, there's going to be winners and losers,
Absolutely.
and that's just like the nature of it, man. And that's one of the biggest things that I hear from Matt when I hear his arguments is it's like, well, a lot of my spots and a lot of like the old school hunters, a lot of our spots are being ruined. And it's like, well, man, I don't disagree with that. Like, I'm sure, dude, I'm sure that your videos have motivated a group of 4 buddies to go elk hunting, and that has fucked up somebody's elk hunting spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like 100%. You know what I
Yep.
mean? But the thing is it's like, well, again, you the 4 guys that went, they kind of had, unfortunately, or for better or worse, I should say, because I don't know the right answer, they have just as much right to have that experience as you have, even though you've been hunting for 30 years. That's like just a fundamental aspect of
Yeah,
it.
and okay, so on the topic of I guess seeing other hunters out hunting, I don't know the actual statistics if you look at it from an analytical standpoint, but from what I've heard from my dad and my uncles back in the 90s when they first started hunting, there were way more hunters that they personally saw than they see hunters today. Back then, so we have this place, it's called Deer Camp. That's where they've been hunting for like
Sure.
since 1989, 36 years. And back then they were like, dude, along the highway, there were trucks parked
Yeah.
everywhere. Now you drive along the highway, there's no cars, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like based off of that one sample size, it's like, there are some arguments. There's a merit to the arguments that some places are being overcrowded, but at the same time, I feel like that's not always true to to every single spot, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I live in Washington and we're not known for the greatest hunting, and so people want to venture out to better states out west. I don't know, but the thing that I can speak for myself is hunter numbers and seeing other hunters outfield has never bothered me.
Right.
I don't know if I'm a minority out here, like where I'm like in the small percentage where it just doesn't bother me. But it's like whenever I go out hunting and I see a hunter, I don't get down. I don't talk trash about that person. I just see him. I'm like, okay, so that person's hunting. I just reroute. Some people will dwell on that and they're like, oh man, like this person's hunting my spot. And they go off on that dude. And it's part of that is because as far as I can remember, even growing up in the early 2000s, seeing hunters has just always been part of it.
Yeah.
And so
Sure.
this idea or this wave nowadays where it's like, oh, there's people everywhere. I guess it's not new to me. So I guess there's not much shock that's coming into me where I'm sure, you're a guide and you've been hunting longer than I have. Maybe you have a honey hole hidden way miles in a wilderness that you might have never seen another soul in. And you might go in there, you might see like four dudes over there now because backcountry hunting has been picking up. All I'm saying is on the topic of saying that hunting is becoming overcrowded. I think there's two sides to look at it, and to just simply say that hunting's being too crowded is if that's the only way it is, I can't really speak on it.
Right. I think someone that what the issue with it, or the reason why people have an issue with it is like, well, for instance, man, like just what you said, and then when I look at your YouTube channel, like you got bear hunts on here, you got mule deer hunts, you got
Mhm,
blacktail hunts, you've got squirrel hunting on it. I mean, you've got all this stuff. So you come across as
mhm,
like a very adaptable guy. And
mhm,
and you enjoy different aspects of hunting. This is something that like I've really tried to get people to embrace, because one thing I've noticed, man, in the last decade.
Cliff's Hunter, I created this knife from iteration in the field. It has been modified and perfected for the backcountry use case. It is my belief that in terms of all around knives, this is the last knife that an elk hunter, mule deer hunter, sheep hunter, goat hunter will need to buy. Go check it out on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com. In the top right, click shop, then Cliff's Hunter. All the details are there.
A lot of people have become very, very specific the type of hunting they want to do, and
mhm,
they forget to adapt. Because what I've seen related to this related to this topic is certain types of hunting. I've seen massive influx in the competitiveness of it,
mhm,
in the field, and some of those hunts, kind of to your point, it's really irrelevant. It's really just
yeah,
a strategic thing, right? You're going to figure out how to how to make it so that doesn't really affect your hunt, right? And then other hunts, certain density of hunters is problematic to kind of
mhm,
everybody's overall experience. Now, my feeling is I'm not in charge of that. The CPW, the Oregon Fish and Game, whoever, they're really in charge of that. So I'm not. I'm not in charge of that, and yes, it may take them a couple years to, like, figure out that, "Hey, we need to adjust tags to adjust density for everybody's quality of a hunt." Like, I get that's a thing, and there might be years that you have some hunts that are kind of a downer because of that. I acknowledge that. But on an individual hunter basis, if you're adaptable, I have well, no, not even if you're adaptable. Just in general, if you're a hunter in America right now, in the US, I have no sympathy for you if you're bitching about this, because if you are adaptable at all, there's so many cool hunts to do.
Mhm,
You know what I mean? Yes, if you want to backpack into a wilderness area in Colorado and that is all you're willing to do, you might have some troubling times right now.
mhm,
But why not do a different hunt, dude? You
mhm.
know what I mean? Like because there's so many opportunities, and that's why I have a really hard time, like, really having much compassion for guys, because it's like, look, dude, like, there's so many things that we have the opportunity to hunt here.
Yeah, I think a prime example of that in the last few years has been archery elk hunting in September. I think we've
Yeah.
seen a giant jump from
Oh yeah.
people interested in that topic. And yeah, in this case, I think a lot of that, if not most of it, comes from social media and just
Oh,
promoting
it
it
it it
online.
comes
Yeah,
from
it definitely
specific
comes from that.
it comes from a handful of specific people. I mean, it's
Yes.
like Rogan, Cam, that collection of people, which I
Yep.
think are all great people, and
Yep.
they're hugely net positive for the hunting
Yeah.
world. But dude, that's like a line that has drove a spike of demand.
Yeah, and on that topic, it's like as you were talking about, a lot of the good elk hunting with a bow happens in September, right? And I get it. If you're a truly passionate bow hunter, which there's a lot of people who just literally live for archery elk in September. I get that.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think for the vast majority of other hunters who aren't as passionate and it might just be like a kind of like an itch that you want to get off of your shoulder, there are so many other hunts that you can do in September that doesn't require a bow or an elk. For example, the first week of September, everybody, in this case, this demographic, they're thinking about the elk woods with a bugle tube and a bow. What am I doing? I'm chilling at squirrel camp
Yeah.
where nobody's hunting squirrels, right? Because everybody's so in tune. And a lot of it, it's not even because they want to do it. A lot of it's just because they feel like that's the hype train where, oh, if everybody's doing this, I should be doing this because I feel like I'm missing out, right? Like that's what's called like you're the fear of missing
Yeah.
out. And so you're jumping not because you actually want to do it, you're jumping on it because you feel like everybody else is doing it, so you should do it. I I've always used that kind of as a strategy when I plan my hunts out. It's like, okay, if this season I'm expecting this hunt to have more pressure, I'm gonna just alleviate some of that pressure and not join that crowd and go do something during that time and go hunt that time or that season or that tag and maybe an off week where it's not as popular or it's not as demanding, right? Because depending, like in Colorado, for example, like they break it up to like first, second, third, fourth season. There are depending on the dates. For example, like third season mule deer is probably one of the tags where a lot of people flock to.
Mhm.
They wanna hunt it because it's the rut or 4th season, right? And so a lot of people how I would go about it's like, I get it. Everybody wants to see big bucks rutting in the snow and hunting that late season, but those big bucks are still alive in 1st and 2nd season too.
Sure.
They're just not might be as dumb and in the wide open as during the 3rd, 4th season. But if you're doing that, you're alleviating some pressure from other hunters from 3rd and 4th season if you're doing a 1st season hunt, where you might enjoy it more because you're seeing less people and you're also not overcrowding the 3rd and 4th season, right? And
Right.
so a part of basically what I'm trying to say here is I'm just adding to your point of being adaptive in the season. Expand your horizons because 5 years ago, I would have never guessed that I would have enjoyed squirrel hunting. Like that's
Sure.
so bizarre to me. Like who the heck wants to go shoot a squirrel? And so now I've done it. And it's like, man, that's I would actually, truthfully, I would rather go squirrel hunting than chase elk with a bow. Like if I'm being
Yeah.
completely honest, because it's just not my thing. I understand there's a demographic for it, and there's a lot of people who live for it. It's just not my thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that comes to, like, a broader point, Simone, like, and maybe this goes beyond hunting, is like, you gotta get in the mindset of not letting other people tell you what you should be happy doing. 'Cause
Hmm.
I feel the same way about I grouse hunt a lot during, like, anytime I get a day off where I'm not guiding in September for archery elk, I'll grouse hunt. And I love grouse hunting with my bow, with foo arrows. I think it's
Mhm,
kind of the same way as squirrels. Like getting into an area that's got a bunch of grouse, you get like one of those years that they're just blowing up. And I
mhm.
get to go out and shoot like 5 grouse or whatever the limit is in the area I'm at. Like maybe it's 3 or 4, whatever, you know. Um, I do that in a day. That's so much fun, man. And
Yeah.
and and nobody is telling me that it's fun other than myself, but I can be rational about it in my mind and be like, "Man, this feels a lot like a day where we killed the bull," or, whatever. I
Mhm,
get the same very similar feeling of like I used my day wisely for my own happiness, you know?
mhm.
And I think people gotta figure that out and not let other people tell them like, the type of hunts that they should be happy doing,
Yeah,
you know?
and just to add to this topic, it's like I think just from my years of hunting, um, I think it's very important, and this is just some wisdom, if you will, that I will share from just what I've experienced is there's a surface level that people look at, and that's what they judge a hunt based off of.
Mhm.
They judge it based off of what they're reading on forums online, based off of e-scouting nowadays. But there's such a drastic difference between what a hunt looks like according to online forums and word of mouth than what it actually is in person. Because
Sure.
I think I don't know if there's an actual term for this, but I call it e-scouting shock, where people will
Yeah.
sit on X and they're just like lost. They're just like, if I
Oh,
go here,
yeah.
there's probably too many people. If I go over here, it's whatever. And they're like, they end up more confused than where they started e-scouting, right? And I think it's very important to just understand that what you read online and what you're e-scouting online, it's not as bleak as it may seem. Because when you go hunt, the hunt is often a lot better than what you're reading
Sure.
online. Because even in Washington, like I hunt, I've hunted in my whole life, and so, like, over the past 20 years that I've spent in these certain units, like, you know exactly the type of hunt you're gonna get because you've hunted it so much. But
Sure.
when I go read, like, what people are saying about that unit online, I'm like, these people make it seem like the world's ending. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's like, oh, there's no deer and there's none of that. And I don't get me wrong, like, there's some merit to it. Our deer populations might not be as good as they were like 50 years ago in the 60s, but it's still got some very solid hunting, right? And I
Sure.
feel like that's something that I just wanted to bring up because if you just look at what we're talking about here, like there's a higher demand for Western tags. There's more people that might be getting involved statistically and analytically. And so that might come as like, it just looks bleak. But when you actually go on a hunt, it's like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. I'm not running
Right.
into people out here. The world's still bright. The sun's still rising and setting. It's like it's another day out there.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, dude, and you'll like I can't tell you how many times, like, I guess to pound the point further, Samong, that I've, like, been hunting with buddies or guiding a guy or something. It's like a unique or it's like a new experience, like something I haven't done yet, and, a day and a half in, I just, like, look at my buddy or the guy I'm guiding, and we're like, "Dude, this is way better than I thought it was gonna be." Like, don't tell
Yeah.
anybody, you know what I mean? Because it's like but you have to you have to go out on a limb a little bit to get to
Mhm.
figure those things out, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
man.
dude, that's a good how are you on time, man? You got another half hour?
Oh, I've all the time, man.
Alright, cool. So, dude, let's use that to bump into your hunting, in the, Pacific Northwest.
Mhm.
What's your favorite species, man?
Dude, I'm a mule deer guy at heart, man.
Oh,
It's
okay.
yeah, I part of that is just because that's one of the first big game animal hunts I've gone on, and
Okay.
so our deer camp is based around mule deer hunting, and so that's like one of the hunts that I hold deepest to my heart, and so I feel like that's just kind of the foundation of where I come from. Granted, I actually started grouse hunting. That's the
Okay.
very first thing my dad took me on because when you're 4 years old, your dad doesn't want to haul you up the mountain go chase deer. Starts you
Sure.
off something with grouse.
Yeah.
But yeah, my mule deer's my animal. Granted, I've started blacktail hunting in the past 3 years, and they're growing on me, man. Like those blacktails, I don't know what
Yeah.
what it is about them.
Dude, so I've hunted blacktails quite a bit, Samong, when I was a kid, but not in the type of topography and vegetation that you've hunted. I've hunted them in Northern California quite a bit,
Mhm.
which is pretty, open, or
Yep.
fairly open, scattered old growth oak trees, maybe draws that have real thick manzanita in them, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. But I've never hunted them in like what people think of in the Pacific Northwest.
Yep.
So I would love to hear, like, I want to hear your perspective. Like, what's the difference between the type of mule deer hunting and the type of blacktail hunting that you're doing?
Yeah, the thing about it in and of itself with mule deer is like if you just looked at mule deer itself, it's already so diverse in a species
Sure.
itself. Comparing
Yeah.
that to a blacktail, now we're just getting
Right.
into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess we'll start with mule deer in Washington. The thing about Washington is it's a very diverse state. If you go to the West Coast, I mean, you have an ocean. You've got like it's
Right.
essentially rainforest, right? You hop up to the Cascade Mountains that splits essentially East and West Washington. Now you've got like high country mule deer, a mix of high country blacktails, and obviously you have what these hybrids that are called bench legs, right? Where mule deer and blacktail crossbreed. And then you start rolling into the east side, which that's where I'm from. I'm from Spokane, like that's where
Yeah.
I'm born and raised, so like Eastern Washington. You start rolling down from the Cascades into these rolling hills, the that's what I call the highlands, and now you get like pure mule deer, and then you go even farther east, and you start going to the agriculture lands, these scablands, which just for the most part it's rock with just these giant cliffs. It's crazy. You go down to the southeast portion of Washington, now you have the Blue Mountains, where it's rugged, steep, very dry, and whatnot. And then you go to Northeast Washington, which is my backyard. You have like the outskirts of the Selkirk Mountains, where it's heavily wooded, very timbered, and it's a very diverse habitat. So with mule deer, it's like you can hunt them just about anywhere you want in Washington, obviously just outside of the west side. Now with blacktail, I actually have spent more time hunting them in areas like you, like closer to like
Okay.
that Northern California type terrain. I've spent some time hunting blacktails in what people consider the normal areas you hunt blacktails in, like the coast and like clear cut country and dark timber type. And the reality of the types of hunting is you're still hunting the same animal that behave essentially the same. It's just that they live in a drastically different environment. And I think that's the one thing that I feel like people who don't really hunt outside of what they're used to don't understand is it's the same animal
Right.
behaving the same. They might have some nuances with their behavior depending on what it is and where they live at, but it's still the same animal. Like
Sure.
I hunt a mule deer in the high country of Washington the same way I hunt a mule deer in the scablands. I'm glassing for deer. I'm looking for a white rump. That's
Right.
all it is, right? One's just like up in the mountains, one's in scablands. Same thing with blacktail, like Northern California, Southern Oregon blacktail, you're looking for a very small deer in essentially like these wide open orange mountains, if you will.
Right.
You come up to like northern Oregon, northwest Oregon, western Washington. It's still a small black-tailed deer, but instead of looking them in orange mountains, you're just trying to find them in a clear cut or dark timber. It's
Right.
like it's not as different as people might think they are.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, dude, when you, to dive into just what you said, because I totally agree with what you're saying, but I run into this a lot with guys that, are hunting much thicker country for elk or deer, and a lot of my tactics is really heavy on, glassing stuff,
Mhm.
Samong. How do you have specific it sounds like when you're in thick timber looking for deer or elk, you're still glassing heavy. Is that correct?
That is absolutely
Like, can
correct.
you describe like actual tactics you're using to do that?
Yeah, I think the premise of why I think a binocular is effective, regardless of how you're hunting, in this case, dark timber is effective, is because as a kid, when we grew up, again, I come from a very poor family, so we didn't have a lot of money to buy gear. And so
Mhm.
back then, when my dad started hunting, long range hunting back then was a 300-yard shot. Anybody
Sure.
who could make a 300-yard shot back then was considered a sniper, at
Yeah,
least
yeah,
at hunting
sure.
camp.
Yeah,
Nowadays, if
yeah.
you hunt with, you get a 300-yard shot, it's like, yeah, it's 300 yards. The point I'm trying to make is back then, because everybody was more successful shooting a deer within 100 yards, the best way to go about that was still hunting, and you're still hunting through timber. And I actually learned this from my dad because the thing about timber hunting is a lot of times you're still hunting through it, and you're actually hunting bedded animals. And if for those of you who don't hunt, you can have a deer in the same exact spot. if he's standing, he's
Yeah.
as obvious as day. The
Yeah.
moment he sits down, he's gone,
Right.
right? And so the reason why I always bring a binocular, especially when I'm still hunting, and I will scan almost more meticulously in the timber than I am if I'm sitting posted up glassing like a mile away, because it's often the little details that you're missing. A lot of times I've walked past deer that are bedded behind like a log, and the only thing that you if you don't see them, all they're doing is that they're peeking over a log with their ears and their eyes. They're looking at you,
Sure.
but you can't see them because they're so low to the ground. And I have walked past so many deer doing that or whatever it is, and they know they're safe because they know you can't see them.
Right.
And so over the years, I'm just like, I don't know why I can't find these animals. Like you see them in the opening in the morning, and then they just vanish. And so over the years of just trying to figure this out, and I wish somebody would have just told me this, would have saved me years of tag soup. And finally, one day, I'm just like, I'm doing something wrong. And so this one time, I'm still hunting. I sat down after like 2 hours of still hunting. I didn't see a single deer. I'm just like, I'm just gonna sit down. I don't know how to find these deer anymore. I was basically giving up. I sit down and I sat there for like 25 minutes, and like 25 minutes sitting in the woods is a long time.
Yeah, sure.
And the next thing I know, like there's a deer that stands up 30 yards right below me. And the moment he stands up, I'm like, where did that deer come from?
Yeah.
And then as that deer is standing there looking at me, I mean, it's a doe, so I'm not shooting a doe. It's this mule deer doe. She's looking at me, and then as I'm staring at this doe, there's like six other deer like around her, like just pop up.
Right.
And I'm like, where did these deer come from? Well, they were bedded there the whole time. And that's when the light bulb finally went off. I'm like, dude, I have been walking past deer like for all these years, not even knowing I was walking past them. Ever since that year, the first thing I couldn't afford it, a good binocular. So I went and found this little $10 binocular that my dad bought at the thrift store. And I started carrying that thing around. My dad was calling me crazy because back then it's all about ultralight. He's like, why are you carrying that giant piece of binocular on your chest? And I'm like, dude, dad, I need this binocular. And so I started hunting, still hunting with the binocular. And that's when I started picking out deer
Yeah.
bedded. And that's to answer your question. That's why I do it, because I think a lot of people, and especially me before learning that lesson, is like, oh, if you're hunting close quarter, there's no way you can miss it, right? That mindset bites a lot of people in the
Yeah.
butt.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Sure.
miss so much things that you can't even comprehend how much things you're missing until
Yeah.
you actually like learn in person and experience that. Like, oh my goodness, like I'm walking past so many animals.
Right. And I think you're hitting on something, something that a lot of people have a hard time like like palating when I mention this. Like, dude, even in really open country, like
Mhm,
in an area, I was blessed in the sense that I hunted a lot of my mule deer hunting in the same area at the same time for like a decade. So I knew aspen benches that deer bedded on. Like if I
mhm,
saw deer go that direction, I kinda knew where they were bedding,
mhm,
but this shit was like you couldn't see anything, man. Like, maybe you could see 300, 400 yards, and I think, what a lot of guys do is they get into a situation where they're, like, so glassing centric, they get to an area where they can only see, like, 400 yards. Like, I mean, I guess that's one question for you, man. When you talk about this, like, you're glassing up bedded animals, how far can you see? Like, what's the distance you're actually glassing with your binoculars?
man, I'm glassing as far as I can see. I think I operate under the rule of, if you can visualize an animal there, you need to glass it. And I don't care if it's
Right.
100 yards or a mile away, right?
Yeah,
That's why
yeah.
in this case, like you just got to have good optics, right? Obviously,
Right.
you're probably not going to spot a deer a mile away with the 10 power binocular. You're probably going to need a spotting scope for that.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think the problem, Samong, is that a lot of guys like they want to glass far away. So when they get into a situation where they can only see 300 yards, they
mhm,
write it off and they won't glass it. It's like,
yeah,
well, dude, like when animals are bedded, you have to kind of like trick yourself psychologically into being like, dude, looking 400 yards in like super thick vegetation, that's the same as being able to look 2 miles in open
mhm,
country. So in a sense, like you should have the same mentality about it. And me personally, dude, I use the same optics. All glass 350 yards with a pair of 15s on a tripod. You know what I mean? Just like
Mhm.
literally doing what you're talking about. Like, I just want to see an antler. I want to see like a buck's ear tick or something like that, and just going through. Because, dude, like the blessing of what you're talking about is when you glass up a deer like that, they're freaking dead. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
because
Because
yep.
there's no stock. It's like, all right, get your gun out when he stands up, shoot him. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and yeah, and to add on to your point, I think a lot of hunters, especially I noticed this in a lot of newer hunters. I take a lot of people out, and even just getting comments in return is
Sure.
a lot of people when they first start hunting and they're glassing, they're always expecting to see a deer broadside in the wide open.
You're right.
And I think that's a toxic mindset because you're not going to glass up every deer like that. That might be the
Yeah.
only deer you glass up because you don't know how to look for an ear that's poking out of a brush or a tine of an elk or something, right?
Sure.
And so that's why I tell people all the time, I don't care if I'm still hunting through the woods and I only see 50 yards. Like I'm gonna glass because more times than not, I kid you not, I feel like I miss more animals up close and personal than I do far away
Sure.
because people just think, oh, if you're looking at 50 yards away, a mule deer standing there is gonna be so obvious. Dude, they're
Yeah.
not obvious. Sometimes they're like literally broadside in the opening.
Oh, yeah.
I don't see them until they start running away. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm such an idiot. Like he was
Dude,
standing in the wide open.
I've been 300 yards in like an aspen flat, Samong, where there's a 900-pound moose bedded in it. And like I glass it. Like I vividly remember one particular situation because I was guiding two guys who I'd guided many years. And we sat there. It was an aspen flat that I glass a lot. I've killed a lot of bucks there. And I'm glassing my eyeballs out, dude, like sitting there for 2 hours, glassing 350, 400 yards. Like shit's painful, you know?
Yeah.
And then just turn into and be like, guys, there's nothing here. Like I've gone over it. And literally, as we got our stuff up, got our packs, a freaking bull moose stood up in the middle of it. Like I missed a bull
Yeah.
moose. You know what I mean? And it's just like how he was laying, I couldn't see him, you
Yeah.
know? And so, yeah, dude, it's a great, great point, man.
Yeah, I
What
think a lot of these lessons just come from experience like that.
Sure, but the thing is that this particular strategy, I love that you brought it up, dude. It's really fun.
So, it's probably my favorite way to hunt.
Yeah, if you
The only
get good
reason why
at it,
I
yeah.
dread it is because I'm carrying a tripod with a camera in my hand, so, like,
Yeah, yeah.
up close and personal like that, I've lost a lot of opportunities trying to set that dang camera up before I shoot it.
Oh, sure,
But
yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
if it wasn't for that case, man, still hunting is my game.
Yeah. This kinda like short range glassing component of like of still hunting, what gear do you use, Samong?
Yeah, so if I'm strictly doing a timber hunt where I know I'm probably not gonna last over 300 yards, I use a 8 by 32 Vortex Razor UHD. That thing is tiny and it's super compact, so it's hard. It weighs
Mhm.
nothing. But I think 8 power in dark timber is better because the light transmission is better than a 10, just because it's not so zoomed in, and you have a
Yeah,
bigger field of view. So when if you're scanning close quarters with a 10 binocular, like you're making a lot of movements just to cover the
sure.
whole thing. Whereas with an 8 or something with less magnification, you can throw it up and you don't have to move as much to already cover the whole, I don't know,
Right.
whatever it is, you know? And so you don't need anything fancy with hunting dark timber. I'm using a UHD, which is Vortex's top of the line binocular, but man, when you're hunting dark timber like that, like $100, $200 binoculars serve you
Sure.
just fine.
Yeah, and I think a light one actually
Yep.
helps too because you can make like if you're not gonna sit down and do the whole like
Yep.
thing, you can actually get a lot of your movement
Yeah,
out of them.
when a lot of times when I do my archery hunts, I actually carry a Vortex Diamondback, like a $200 binocular,
Mhm.
over my $1,800 binoculars because like you don't need that type of quality glass to see something at 80 yards, you
Right.
know? And on top of that, it's like the physical size itself. Like the UHDs are huge. The
Yeah,
Diamondbacks are tiny, you know? And so the fact that you can just like stealthily pull it up and put it back down,
sure.
that sometimes can be the difference between spooking something and not spooking something.
Yeah, yeah, and just the ergonomics of having a
Yep.
smaller binocular. Have you used any of the stabilized binoculars?
I have not, but I have heard a lot of good things about them.
Yeah, and I know that you work a little bit with Vortex,
Yep. They're one of my business partners.
and I'm sure at some point that, they'll come out with one, you know, those guys that
Yep.
are good, you know, that It's been a while since I've used much Vortex stuff, but I
Mhm.
always tell guys, like, for the value and then plus
Yeah.
the warranty is freaking ridiculous. Uh, it's ridiculous in an awesome way,
Yep.
you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I'm a fan of Vortex stuff, particularly, like, as the value play. But, man, the stabilized binoculars and, like, my viewership is gonna be like, "Oh, freaking Cliff's, like, going out on this shit again, gonna talk about this SIG." And
Yep.
I mean, it's not like I don't I do some stuff with SIG, but I promise you this really isn't about that. Those things freaking work so good. So among like
Mhm.
there's some little issues that some people have. Some people actually get seasick from them. There's all these like little
Mhm.
idiosyncratic issues that can make them not perfect for everybody. But dude, for the type of stuff you're talking about, you should try them, man.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
epic.
so Vortex doesn't have image stabilizing binoculars yet, but they just recently came out with Vortex Golf rangefinders, and those things have image
Oh,
stabilization in it.
okay.
So I was at the summit last year, and we got to go play golf because Vortex has a golf course right next to the facility.
Okay.
And so I haven't looked through a binocular image stabilized
But you're
binocular, but
familiar with the
I've looked through the
technology.
rangefinder, and yeah, I'm with you. It's a night and day difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting technology, man. And
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think I caught on your video, and I was going to ask you on one of your videos, like you're using some things other than a tripod to control movement,
Yep.
right?
So the other one I'm using, it's called the Kestrel Glassing Systems monopod, and so it's
Okay.
literally just a monopod, and so you're gonna put a stud in that little slot in your binocular, and you slide it in. That's basically it. The advantage of that over glassing a tripod is with the tripod, anytime you're gonna need to move positions, you need to adjust all the legs. Whereas
Yeah.
with the monopod, if you're done looking this way and you want to look over here, you just literally bring the whole monopod up and glass that way, and it's a
Simple.
lot faster to deploy than a tripod, but if you're just looking for ultimate stability, like, you still can't beat glassing off a tripod,
Yeah.
like,
Sure.
there's nothing messing with the binocular, but
Yep.
it's just depending on the type of hunt and depending on what I'm doing, like, that'll vary depending on what I bring on my pack.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. But I've always been such a big proponent of guys really learning how to like stabilize their binoculars. However,
Yeah,
if you don't want to use a tripod, learn how to frame with your
I think
body,
I think
whatever.
in today's world, most, if not all animals die because of glassing.
Yeah.
They're just animals are just getting spotted.
Yep.
People like to make arguments of why animals are dying. Oh, trail cams and what. It's like, I don't care what gear you try to argue. The number one reason I feel like animals are dying today, at least in my case, is because of binocular. I glassed
Yeah.
them up and I went and killed them.
Yeah. Dude, and what's crazy about it, someone like historically, dude, when I was a kid, and like my dad was an outfitter, elk got killed in rifle seasons in the West at least, primarily by getting driven. So
Yeah,
imagine that like that cultural shift. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like if I talk to my dad now about elk hunting, he's like, "What the fuck you guys talking about?" Like, what it's not it's so foreign to him the way
mm,
that we hunt now. And it's interesting how there's those very dynamic shifts. And I think there's always a little value to like throwing back to old tactics too, because I think sometimes it's like, you know what? There's so much around glassing. Like, is it a worth like looking at some of those old tactics that guys used to do? So I think, you know, it's kind of another conversation, but it's interesting, man, because I actually specifically remember the time in my life it all changed. Are you familiar with Alaska Guide Creations, the Bino
I
Pack?
am. Yes, I am.
This guy Jared started that company, and I knew Jared for, I don't know, dude, like 15, 17 years ago. I'd call him up and we'd bullshit about stuff. We had some like mutual friends and whatever. I would talk to him, and he's the one who he used to sit there, Samong, and tell me like, "Oh, Cliff, I gotta." He was one of Swarovski's very first dealers. He
Mm,
guided those guys on Alaska brown bear hunts before they were in the optics business. And so he
mm,
was one of their like when they were just crystal guys. So he was one
mm.
of their first dealers. And for years, dude, I would talk to him and he'd be like, Cliff, you got to get a tripod. You got to get some good binoculars. And in my mind, I was like, whatever, Jared. Like, and because I just was like standard, you know, like
Yep.
1990s, early 2000, like you use binoculars just to, you like, oh yeah, deer, shoot it. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
weren't, like, glassing really like we
Mhm.
do now, and so I remember specifically finally breaking down and, like, getting an expensive tripod, getting a pair of good binoculars, and just, like, sitting there and being like, "Ah, this actually works." You know?
Yeah. You
It's
know,
pretty
I had a similar revelation to that. I mean, I kinda explained my little story earlier of glassing in the timber, but again, glassing in the timber versus glassing long distances is not the same thing. It wasn't until 2017 when I actually, like, started glassing like how I do now, because even though we were timber hunting back then, it's like, y y if you didn't take the right route and the deer weren't there that day, like, you weren't seeing any animals, right?
sure.
And so it wasn't until 2017 when I was like, "Okay, if the deer aren't on my ridge, like, where are they at?" You know? And so I started finally picking up glassing, and, like, ever since I started glassing the way we do now, as most people would know Western glassing now, I've been way more successful in the
Yeah,
past, like, 6, 7 years than I have, like, my entire previous hunting life.
yeah. So Samong, is that a cross species in the Pacific Northwest? So are you glassing for Roosevelt elk too?
No, so, again, if you go to the Cascades, like Central Washington, if you will, you
Mhm.
kinda get these hybrids, Rockies and Rosies.
I
They
gotcha.
get they get these giant bodies because they're Roosevelt, and then they still get pretty decent antlers because they got Rockies. But we do have purebreds. Like, if you just go the further east you get towards, like, Idaho, like, they're just straight up
Right.
Rockies. And
Sure.
then if you go to, like, coast, like, those are just pure Rosies.
Yeah.
It's usually just the Cascade area where you kind of get this weird mix between blacktail mule deer and then elk, Roosevelts, and Rockies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How much hunting of pure Roosevelts have you done?
I have actually only done pure Roosevelt 2 years as a tag holder, and that actually was in Oregon, because
Okay.
in Washington, like, living in Spokane, I'm hunting Rockies, and so, like, to and the thing of how the tag system works in Washington is if you're buying an elk tag, you have to choose whether you wanna hunt elk in Western Washington or Eastern Washington.
Okay.
And so I've always done Eastern Washington because it's my backyard, it's
Sure.
easy. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
never actually really had an opportunity to hunt Roosevelt in Washington just because of that how they allocate those tags. And so, when I started pursuing YouTube and started doing this more as a career, if you will,
Yeah.
that's when I actually started branching out. I was like, "Okay, well, if I'm hunting Rockies in Washington, I'm gonna take my advantage and go hunt Rosies in Oregon." And so I
Sure.
started the first year was 2021. I didn't kill one, and 2022 was I actually killed one down in Oregon. And so,
Okay.
but that's as a tag holder. I've tagged along with my brother who he's planning to move from Portland back to Spokane now, but he's been in Portland for the past like 10 years, if you will. He got married and it stayed in Portland. So I've actually ventured down there pretty frequently and started tagging along with him. Done archery elk hunts down there, and obviously I killed mine with a rifle. And so I have a not a lot, but enough experience with Rosies to kind of understand the differences that you're dealing with when it comes to Rosies and
Yeah,
Rockies.
what are the big differences? Like, tactically, I mean, what have you found that actually works?
I think the biggest thing, okay, like I'm not experienced with Rosies, but from what I can tell, they behave almost the same as Rocky. Like they're elk. Like I
Mhm.
don't think that Rosies behave in this weird way that Rockies won't. They bugle, they cow call and whatnot. The biggest thing is just the country that they live in.
Sure.
Um, Rosies, they're accustomed to clear cuts. And so they have these patterns of like, okay, clear cuts to bedding areas to timber. And the thing that I don't think a lot of people realize about the West Coast is, man, that those mountains are some of the most treacherous places
Oh,
I
yeah.
have ever stepped foot. It's a lot of it is cliff country. I literally call it cliff country because
Yeah.
that's what you're dealing with. You get these giant waterfalls, and when it rains over there, it just does not know when to stop. And so it's like it's really slick. And but then I guess the other thing I can speak on it is when it comes to weather, this is probably the most drastic thing I've noticed between Rockies and Rosies. Rosies actually kind of thrive in the rain.
Oh,
If it's
okay.
raining that day, I don't care how bad it is, the elk are out in
They're
the
still
clear
doing their
cuts.
thing. Yeah.
Whereas Rockies, I've noticed if it's like really bad weather, it's raining hard,
Sure.
and it's not. I feel like these Rockies, at least where I hunt, they kind of hide.
Yeah,
They're not
they
as
like
com.
hold oh, yeah.
Yeah, they
They
hole
do
up.
what people do. Go
That's
stand
the
under the
biggest.
trees, yeah.
Yeah. So when you say like, what's the difference? Like, that's really the only thing that kind of comes to mind as to how
Mhm.
Rockies and Rosies differentiate from each other. Is just when the weather's bad, it's that's when you see the difference of behavior. But if you're just talking about a normal day, bluebird skies, it's like they're they're on a certain pattern of some kind, and they're eating, they're drinking, they're talking like
Yeah.
elk. There's really no difference, and from my experience.
And you guys are basically like moving from clear cut to clear cut and glassing them, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's basically all it is, because you know that the clear cuts are where the feed is. So if they're
Yeah,
not in one clear cut today, they're probably somewhere else, right?
sure.
Because the thing about that dark West Coast Oregon, Western Washington is in those dark timber, like really old growth. The ground floor is like literally barren.
Yeah.
There's nothing to eat, and so naturally the elk are going to flock up to clear cuts to go eat. Whereas a much more traditional type of area that you might hunt Rocky Mountain elk in, it's like you can have these dark timber, but they can still kind of browse around in the timber if they wanted to, because it's not
Yeah.
as barren as the rainforest in the West Coast. Obviously, I'm generalizing here. I'm sure there's like little
Yeah.
niches pieces that might not ring true, but as a generalization, that's kind of the main difference. It's like you already know you're gonna glass up rosies eventually on a clear cut. The
Yeah.
only difference that I guess I'll speak on pressure. This is kind of one thing that I've learned just hunting pressured rosies is they will always spend time in the clear cut, but when they become pressured, they just become nocturnal.
Mhm.
So they're in the clear cut all night. 30 minutes before light comes, they're out of the clear cut. And
Yeah.
so you might go, you might, oh, there's no elk here. It's like, no, they were there. They're just smart now. They're just not showing themselves, exposing themselves to danger. And so that's the one thing I can tell people about rosies. There's, I guess, in a way, my point is they're a little bit more patternable than Rockies, on the other hand. You know, there's
Right.
clear cut. That's their feed. Focus on clear cuts pretty much.
Yeah, yeah, sure. You bring up a good point though, Samang, and I think it applies to Rockies too. That I've noticed this. So in different areas in like, I mean, if you look at like the Selway in Idaho, the Salmon River system, like that stuff, or you look at somewhere like the Flat Tops in Colorado, the timber is very different in those two different places. And then even within those geographies, you can find timber that's really different. And what I found, like if I glass up a bunch of elk or I see a bunch of elk go into like an old growth spruce forest, like a kind of like a dying forest that probably should have burnt years ago, but hasn't because of like the fire suppression that's all over these wilderness areas. It's pretty common to have these really old growth spruce forests. Same exact dynamic. If you walk in them, there's nothing. Like it's denuded on the ground. And what I figured out, like if I know that bedding area, or I can look at it and I can see that it's like that, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like these elk are going to travel into the open, an avalanche chute, some other meadow somewhere else to feed. But if you go into the timber and there's like ferns everywhere and there's like a little pocket where grass is knee high, good luck because the elk will never come out of that shit. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it like because they why would they? You know?
Mhm,
And it's a really good observation, dude, because under those two, I think what happens is under those two different types of scenario, people are like, well, my elk don't act like your elk. It's like, no, 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 dude. If you put the same elk in the same situation, they're gonna do the same thing. They
mhm.
gotta eat.
Yep.
Elk are like cattle, man. Like they have to eat a
Mhm.
certain volume of basically grasses. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
if where they're bedding and what that looks like vegetative wise, it tells the guy a lot, dude. I think it's
Mhm.
a great observation that you're hitting on,
Yeah,
man.
again, I wish to do more Roosevelt elk hunting so I can be more experienced, but as of right now, with my limited experience, like that's really all I can speak about when it comes to the differences between them. But for the
Yeah, yeah,
most part,
sure.
I think Rosies and Rockies have more similarities than they do differences.
Yeah, yeah, which makes sense for sure, man. I had some experience. I have very limited experience with them. One of my levels of experience with them is the time that I spent on Vancouver Island,
Mm.
and they're so dumb. Like that, they're
Well,
gigantic and they're so dumb.
I
You know
think
what I
that's just
mean?
because you're hunting on Vancouver Island
Yeah,
that they're
yeah, yeah,
dumb.
exactly. They're like they don't get hunted very much, you know what I
No.
mean? But yeah, that's it has nothing to do with the species, but it's like I could construe it that way. I'm like, "Oh, well, these guys say Roosevelts are hard to kill, man." I used to see a lot of like 370 inch, 380-inch bulls just standing out in the open. But
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's they're so dependent on where they're at, the
Oh yeah.
pressure and everything else. What about bears, man? What's your rundown on bears? Spring stuff,
Dude.
fall stuff? Do you hunt them both?
So Washington, actually, we just lost our spring bear season like 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's a
There
bummer.
was a giant thing going on about it. Everybody was up in flames about it. We still are. Um, I only drew Washington spring bear one time, and that was in 2018. I didn't shoot anything. I only went out twice because I was still in college, didn't have time.
Sure,
But this year, I still have. I'm planning to do more spring bear hunts. But no, despite losing our spring bear, like Washington has phenomenal bear hunting. We have one of the most robust black bear populations, which is why losing the spring bear season was absolute blasphemy. It made no
sure,
sense. But man, black bears. So in Washington, it opens August 1st. It's actually one of the earliest seasons of black bear that you can hunt in the West.
sure,
Um, and so because there's really nothing else I hunt, that's what I focus my August to. And it's one of those things where bears are either the easiest thing to hunt or they're the hardest thing to hunt.
sure,
And so when people are like sending me DMs and emails of how do you find bears, I'm like, dude, honestly, like I don't know what to tell you this season because it's so driven on how our berries do from
sure.
year to year, and it fluctuates. You don't know how the berries are going to be. Like one year it can be just super plentiful here, very abundant. The next you go there, it's just a wasteland. There's nothing. But
Right.
the bears are still around somewhere, so you just got to work around it. But the point I'm trying to make here is our bears are really robust, and I love hunting them, and especially in the high country. I've just recently started getting into high country bear hunting, is because it's beautiful country. You can get back in there where like you will never see another soul. But we've got some tanks. I
Yeah,
like we've
sure,
got some big black bears, and on top of that, I think what people who don't hunt bears don't realize is I love eating bear. I think
sure.
it's top three meat wild game for me. And so I guess back to your questions, like what about bears? I don't know. They're just kind of that species where like you either love them or you don't like to hunt them. And
Yeah,
I don't really think there's like in between. Like I don't think there's such a thing as a casual bear hunter. You're either all about it or you're just not really about bear hunting.
sure.
I'm all about it.
Just it's an interesting one because I think well back to some of the earlier conversation, Samong. I think it's been kind of an underrated hunt for a lot of
Very.
for a long period of time. I feel like it's gotten a little more interest, at least in Colorado and in
Hmm.
those states. Man, when I first started outfitting, or even if I reflect all the way back to my dad's days outfitting there, nobody gave a shit about fall bear hunting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And now
Yep.
now it's more and more a thing.
Yep.
It's for sure growing in interest, and it's a very fun hunt.
Yeah. I think
Um,
a lot of bear hunts back then was just kind of like you had a bear tag just in case
yeah, oh,
you
there's a
ran into
bear,
a bear.
shoot it. Yeah,
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 well, but
yeah.
you're actually like targeting deer or you're targeting elk.
Right.
Nowadays, I feel like there's this rise in like actual
Yeah,
bear hunters actually targeting bear. And
sure.
I've noticed that when you actually target bears, your success rate skyrockets as opposed to just be like, oh, I'm gonna walk around and shoot a deer. If I see a
Yeah,
bear, I'll shoot a bear.
yeah, and you'll
You know?
and you figure out how to hunt them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And
It
it's been
yeah.
a roller coaster trying to figure out how
It
to hunt bears.
sounds and it sounds like a lot of your hunting strategies is very similar to what I've learned over the time is like fall stuff is all about the feed sources.
Yep.
It's like the dominant thing.
Hmm.
What kind of berries do you hunt them on, Samong? And like what in those two different types of conditions, abundant berries and then not so abundant berries, like what's your kind of go-to strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the primary food source in the fall here is huckleberries. It's either
Okay.
huckleberries or there are some places where you have blueberries, but for the most part of where I hunt, it's huckleberries. And so huckleberries are the main thing. And so like if you have this time of season where you have this growth of both huckleberries and another source, let's say like a manzanitas or elderberries, for example, the thing about it is they grow at different elevations. They grow at different climates. A lot of
Mhm.
huckleberries grow at higher elevations. So you're talking like 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet elevation or higher. And then manzanitas, they often grow in drier climates, more valley floor type, whatnot, like 2,000, 3,000 feet, like very bottom floor type conditions. What I've noticed is if you have a time of the season, and this usually occurs like the first week of August, where you might have both ripe manzanitas, for example, and like ripe huckleberries up high, I will always flock to higher elevation because I feel like bears will naturally prefer huckleberries over all the other sort of food sources that
Okay.
there might be. So
Sure.
huckleberries are always prime. In the event that like the huckleberries have not come in, or in this case have already been wiped out, or just never came in that season because it didn't have the right conditions to grow,
Sure.
that's when I start looking elsewhere. So you look at the time of the year. Okay, what is it? What other berries are growing? Is it manzanitas? Is it elderberries? What are they? And many times, if it's not berries I'm looking for, I'm actually just looking at burns. And it sounds weird, but burns have a lot of stumps that bears will just go and demolish, right? Because that's they're looking for any type of protein, which stumps are often a good way to find termites
Sure.
or grubs or whatever. And so the thing about bear in this dynamic that I'm trying to explain is it's very complicated, especially if you're trying to figure out because people always hear, oh, huckleberries, 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 but then you go there, it's like there's no huckleberries. What do you do?
Right.
It's like, okay, well, now you gotta divert. It's like you can't really I don't really have a plan B. Let's just put it that way. It's always
Yeah.
huckleberries first. The plan B is just, okay, now I need to reset. I need to reobserve how the year is going, what's actually in, what's actually not in. Because again, with Washington, I break Washington up into these things where I call microclimates, where you can have like the Northeast region. You can have like, for example, two mountains that are like maybe 5 miles apart, and they're both 5,000 feet elevation high. One mountain might be loaded with huckleberries, and the other one's just desolate.
Right.
And so, like, you also have to figure that out. You might go up to that mountain where it's desolate and be like, "Oh, the huckleberries are in," but the other guy across the mountain's like, "Dude, the huckleberries are loaded. There's bears everywhere over
Yeah.
here."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Sure.
that's the thing about bear hunting. It's why I said it's either the hardest thing to hunt or it's the easiest thing to hunt. It's like
Yeah.
you could go there, you might have 10 bears on one hillside,
Yeah.
whereas you might spend days never seeing a bear elsewhere.
Yeah. Bears are like the ultimate optimizer in the fall.
Yep.
You got to figure out not only what they're eating, but like where it's the best. 'Cause
Yes.
that's the key, and it sounds like
Yep.
you got it dialed in. Like, it's so weird, Samong, like, to hear your strategy because it's so analogous to how I've hunted them in the fall in, like, Colorado or whatever, like, same deal. Like,
Mhm.
I know that if the acorns are ripping, but chokecherry is also good, I'm gonna find them in chokecherry runs,
Yep.
right? Because they like that better. Like,
Yep.
I'll cut a bear's stomach open and it'll literally look like a giant cherry pie.
Yep.
Like, he just shove that shit in his like stomach. And they just optimize for their preference, but also just like where they can put on the most weight.
Yep.
It's
Yeah,
pretty
I
amazing.
think that's the main thing is like there's a priority list for these bears, and I feel like the reason why I'm ranking these food sources is because they really do go after what's gonna
Sure.
get them through the winter the most efficient, right? Like, why am I gonna go spend my time elsewhere where I'm gonna eat something that's not giving me as much fat or whatever I need, whereas I can go up high and eat that stuff. And I feel like that's really what I'm trying to get at is there's these bears, they have certain food sources that they prefer over other food sources,
Right.
and they'll resort to those lower end food sources if the first ones aren't available.
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. Dude, I've stole a ton of your time, Samong, but I have to. So, one question on your YouTube channel.
Okay.
Dude, I wish you the best with it. I mean, it's awesome to see your momentum, dude.
Hmm.
Like, the fact that just me watching it, like, or in the period of time I've watched it, you've gained 20,000 subscribers, huge.
Yeah.
Like, what's your goal with it, man? And I don't mean like quantitatively. We could have a whole other conversation about that to some
Oh
extent.
yeah.
I personally think it's like the number. If you get to 500 or a million or 10 million, to me, that's kind of irrelevant to
Yep.
the goal. What's your goal with it, man?
The truth is, I've never really had a goal with it. It's just kind of I'm just kind of riding this wave. I enjoy it. Like the first and
Sure.
foremost is I enjoy it. So I just want to keep having fun, keep putting out these hunts that people can relate to, and that's really it. Like I don't have a goal. When I started this, I didn't have a goal to make money off of it or get to a certain subscriber count. It's just I did it because I enjoyed it, and I feel like if I ever lose that focus of enjoying it, I that's where everything goes downhill. So like I don't
Yeah,
want to
sure.
divert from that at all.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Dude, I have to ask because it's something that I really enjoy from mine. What's your feelings, dude, when you get these message I get messages that I used to construe as, like, weird, Samong, like, where people are like, "Hey, I watched your videos. It was really cool, and It changed my life." And I'm like, "What?" Like, dude, how
Uh,
did like, I'm sure you get this kind of stuff, right?
yeah, yeah, I do,
Um,
and, I don't I honestly don't know. I don't have an
yeah, you're
answer
like,
for that.
"What are you talking about, man?"
It's like,
Yeah.
I don't think what I'm doing was that deep, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have the same response. And I hope your videos do change people's lives. I hope mine do too. I just think it's like a funny thing that I at least I didn't
Yeah.
personally anticipate. Um, all right, dude. Some standard questions that I asked Samong. Do you got any like underrated gear in the hunting world that you'd like to talk about or something you commonly use?
Ooh, underrated gear. That's a simple question, but for some reason, it's also a very complicated question. I don't know. I feel like everything I use is so like it's a necessity, and I don't really
Sure,
know if see because like I'm a gear junkie.
sure.
And so, like, what's normal to me might be, like, very foreign to another guy, so, like, when you're saying, like, something that's weird for me, I'm like, everything I'm using is normal, right? So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
I don't know what's actually, like, not normal and what's normal, but, man, if I had to just guess something, I definitely think it would be a tripod adapter. It sounds very it sounds basic, but back to what we were talking about, we were touching on the topic of glassing very heavily. I feel like if you're glassing and you're not glassing on a tripod, you're missing out on a lot of stuff. You know, hand holding a binocular, it will get you leap and light years ahead of just not glassing at all. But take it one step further and get a tripod adapter of some kind.
Yeah. Do you have a specific one that you use, man?
Yeah, I just used the Kestrel Glassing Systems tripod adapter.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Is it like go around the objective or how
Nope.
does it
So
go?
so so the so I use the Kestrel Glassing Systems system, if you will.
Mhm.
So that system requires your binoculars to have one stud that
Yeah.
can be used for both the tripod adapter and that monopod that I was talking about. So
Okay.
so you can just pop one off and put the other one on.
Yeah.
That way I don't have to, keep swapping out my stud to fit some other adapter or
Sure.
whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. And I have you I are you familiar with the outdoorsman one?
Somewhat. I haven't
Yeah,
used it.
it's kinda similar. It's like a proprietary stud that goes in there. I prefer those over like the barrel
Yes, me too.
grabs, you know?
Yep.
Um, no, that's a good one, dude. I
I don't know
totally
if it's
agree with that.
normal or not, but I feel like that's not common in a lot of people's gear list.
Sure. Do you have anything, and this is totally an opinion one, man, and if you don't have one, it's totally cool. Do you have anything that you see other hunters use or other hunters, like, they're really obsessed with that you think is kinda overrated?
Hmm. What do I think that is overrated? That is actually a really good question. Because the thing is, it goes back to my little thing where like I don't really care about what other people use.
Yeah, you don't
Like
pay attention to it, yeah.
I figured out my own system and I just stick to what works with me. But yeah, overrated. I don't know. I just
No,
feel
that's
like
fine. That's
I just
nothing wrong with that,
I
dude.
guess I'm just trying to play it safe and I don't want to offend anybody and I want to keep my hate comments at a down low. You know.
No, that's all good, dude. That's fine, man. Um, dude, do you got a bucket list hunt or, anything? Like fishing outdoors thing that you that
Man, I would love to do some type of Alaska hunt, man. Like
oh, okay.
Alaska's the place. That's I plan to go there this August actually for a fishing trip, but fishing is not the same as hunting.
Oh, okay. Where do
I
you
love to fish, but
where are you gonna go?
so I'm actually waiting for my buddies to finalize that. I just told
Yeah,
them like, hey, plan everything, just tell me the dates and I'll be up there.
sure.
So
Cool.
they're figuring it out, but I'm assuming we'll probably fly into Anchorage or something, and then if we
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
drive out, we'll drive out somewhere.
Cool, cool. No, I mean, Alaska's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I had taken quite a few years off from going up there, but last year I went up. This year I'm gonna go up and do some hunts. So it's a good place, dude. Good place
Yeah.
for an outdoorsman. But Samung, where can people follow you, man? And I'll let you go.
Yeah, so my primary platform is YouTube. You can find me at Samong Outdoors, Samong Outdoors. That's where I put a lot of my videos of my hunting and fishing adventures. You can also follow me on Instagram. I'm not super active on Instagram, but you can find me at Instagram at sy_outside.
Sweet. Thanks, dude. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this content, do me a huge favor. Subscribe on whatever platform you consume it on. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever works for you guys. Everything else is on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com. Go there and it's going to be very apparent to you that I work my ass off just to not have a real job. All the hunts I guide, all the seminars I put on, all the unique experiences I offer, and the membership site, all the details are there.